afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to another session of Take 5. We're going to spend the next 5 minutes looking at God's Word, and we're going to focus on this idea of friendship. You know, my family and I, we have lived in some amazing places, and over the years, we've met some amazing people, and God has put just incredible people in our lives, and has allowed us to build genuine relationships with people that we met years ago, and we still connect with them and still meet them, and it's so awesome. So as we look at this idea of friendship, we're going to look at two characters, Jonathan and David, and that takes us to 1 Samuel chapter 18, and we're going to look at the first 4 verses. So let's go ahead and dive right into it. It says, after David had finished talking with Saul, Jonathan became one in spirit with David, and he loved him as himself. It says, from that day Saul kept David with him and did not let him return to his father's house. And Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. Jonathan took off the robe he was wearing and gave it to David along with his tunic and even his sword, his bow, and his belt. Man, so here we have Saul, right? So Saul's the king of Israel and Jonathan is his son. So Jonathan is the king's son. And then you have David. So David has just slayed Goliath, and he's having this conversation with Saul. And then whenever he's done having that conversation with Saul, we see this discussion we see this interaction between Jonathan and David in verse 1. And it says, Jonathan became one in spirit with David, and he loved him as himself. And I think that's so awesome. You know, when we think about the second greatest commandment that Jesus gave us, it was to love our neighbors as ourselves. And we see Jonathan express that in this friendship here. It says that he loved him as himself. And we think about how we love ourselves, right? You know, it's kind of a weird thing, like, how do I love myself? Well, you know, we want good things for ourselves. We want to be successful, you know. We want to accomplish great things with our lives. And that's how we are to be with our friends. We're there to want the same things for them, to pray blessings over them, to pray that they are successful, not only in this physical world, but even in the spiritual realm, right? That they are very, very successful and they are blessed. So we are to love them as ourselves. That's the first takeaway in an amazing friendship. So the next thing we look at is going to be found in verse 3. And it says, and Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. So out of this love for David, it says that he made a covenant with him, right? So what we know is that this covenant was a covenant of mutual loyalty. And we see that in chapter 20. So, you know, Saul becomes very angry with David because David is being so successful. King Saul sending him out to fight battles, and he's winning them, and people are showing favor towards him. And out of this jealousy, Saul tries to kill David. So in chapter 20, David's having this interaction with Jonathan, and he's like, bro, why is your dad trying to kill me, right? And Jonathan's like, nah, man, my dad wouldn't try to kill you. He would tell me if he was going to do something like that. But the two of them, they show this sense of loyalty, right? They make a covenant with one another. And then on top of that, they actually come up with this plan so that Jonathan can see that his dad, King Saul, is trying to harm David. And then Jonathan goes even further in demonstrating his loyalty by warning David that his dad is going to harm him. You know, it would have been very easy for Jonathan to sit back and say, you know what? Maybe if my dad takes out David, then I can be king, right? But he doesn't do that. He's loyal to his friendship. And that's our second takeaway from this, is that we are to be loyal in our friendships. You know, I think that makes a very strong friendship. You know, times get difficult sometimes in friendships, right? You know, if you're a student, you know, you got, you know, girls and boys and all this other stuff, you know. If you're adults, you got work and stuff like that. If you got friends at work and people are trying to climb up the corporate ladder and all these different things, but we have to be loyal to one another. We have to be there to support one another in those difficult times. So being loyal in our friendships. And then the last takeaway is going to be in verse 4, where it says, Jonathan took off the robe he was wearing and gave it to David, along with his tunic and even his sword, his bow, and his belt. Man, he took off his robe and he gave it to David. And I think that's so cool, you know. You ever heard somebody like talk about someone else and go like, man, that guy's so awesome, or that girl's so awesome? They would give you the shirt off their back. That's literally what Jonathan did here. He took what he had on his back and he gave it to David. You know, and as friends, that's how we are to be for one another. We're there to support one another. We're there to give towards one another, It might be financially, it might be through giving godly advice, it might be through spending time, but we're there to show that same sense of love by giving them the shirt off our back if they need it. So that's my encouragement for you guys and for myself today, that we would, one, reflect and be thankful for the amazing friends that God has put in our lives, but also that we would go out and be friends to others. There's a lot of people out there that are hurt, that are broken, and they need a friend. And I believe that God has called you and I to be that friend, to love them as ourselves, to be a loyal friend, and to be willing to give them the shirts off our back if they need it. Hey, I love you guys, and we'll see you next week. We'll see you on Friday. Have a great week.